The technology to save our world is coming.
Welcome, this is Alexander's Agenda, and today we're looking at should you watch Moonhaven. So, Moonhaven is a new sci-fi show that's come out. The first 2 episodes have been released, and the next 2 are coming on the 14th. This is one of those slightly weird sci-fi shows, and well, you're here to know whether you should watch it, and I've watched it, so I can tell you. So what's the story actually about? Well, there's something wrong with the Earth. Bit of climate change, bit of something else. It's one of these times where they never really make it clear, and they're not going to, because they've been too lazy to write the full story out. But the way they decide to fix it is to send some kind of supercomputer to the moon, stick it in the ground, and it terraforms a teeny tiny part of the moon, where they send 100, 200, 300 people, the best they have to offer, and they live there for, and I quote, 3 generations. So assuming a generation is 25 years, they've been there 75 years. They've got their own little system going, they're in a nice little cult, and now that 3 generations have passed, they're going to come back on some kind of event they call the bridge or something like that, and they're going to bring with them the ways of the moon people and all the amazing technology which we sent up there 75 years ago, and somehow use that to fix the Earth and what's wrong with it through unknown means for unknown problems which they don't explain. It is what it is. Now, I'll start by saying I absolutely hate all of the sci-fi elements of this whole show. It's weird, it makes no sense, and I don't even bother trying to explain any of it. There's a super smart computer that can terraform the moon, create artificial gravity, air, water, turn wooden tables into TV screens, project projections of dead people, a bit like Amazon's Alexa's dead voice from the data collected during their life so you could say goodbye to them. It's weird. In fact, the only bit of the technology I do like is a cool little hand scanner they have, like a tricorder, except rather than showing little flashing lights, when you point it at something it comes up with little bits of text in their weird foreign language, which tells them stuff.
Victim Chill Spen.
Who killed Chill Spen? The mystery begins.
Stragon now is the killer.
The mystery ends.
Now, the show as a whole is somewhat reminiscent of a show I saw the first couple of episodes of called Omniscient, I believe, which was this weird little French show in which tiny little bug cameras followed you around and essentially snitched on you if you did anything wrong, until one day the main character's father is murdered and it's deemed an accident and covered up. Rather similarly, this show is based around a murder, or 2 to be precise. Now, the first of these murders happens in the moon colony. This is our first introduction to their legal system. It turns out their detectives don't do any detective work. There's no tracking down, there's no solving the case. They're just told exactly what happens by the all-powerful computer, except the computer only shows them there were 2 people there, and an eyewitness tells them there were 3. Now, the second murder is different, because the second murder happens on the ship that came from Earth that's in a diplomatic area, so the computer doesn't see what goes on inside, and thus the detectives actually have to do some detecting. Except there's one more thing. These 2 murders are related, even though one happened before the Earthship arrived and one afterwards. We see at least the lead up to one and what happens during the second. But there's a conspiracy. Something bigger is going on. And that's as much as I'm going to tell you about the story so far. One, because I've only seen the first 2 episodes, and 2, because I don't want to ruin too much for you, so if you do decide to watch this, you won't know everything that's going to happen. So one of the things you're going to notice with this show is they have their own little language. They kind of speak in poems, and I'll put in a couple of clips in a second, but let's just say it's weird. And I've watched the first 2 episodes, which comes out to about 2 hours in total, and it does not get any easier to understand. This isn't like Belter talk from The Expanse, which, you know, you learn a few words and the rest of it is kind of contextual. It's kind of a thing of its own. It's almost like they're speaking some kind of mix of Old English and poetry. Like the writer read a bit too much Shakespeare and thought they'd put some of it to action.
Chilastrago. They fit well? She showed no shadow or cringe?
Nay, bloom and bright light, the both of them. They had hard days and easy days, but the killing makes no sense. I should be lucky to find a love so loyal true.
Not just that, they also have weird culty dances they do. And that's a thing in and of itself. Anyway, I'll play a couple of clips here. So, what you may have noticed from the clips I've shown, if I've shown the right ones, is that the moon is somewhat, let's say, sparsely populated. So while they have only terraformed a portion of the moon, they've only brought up a few hundred, maybe a few thousand people. And in comparison, when you see Earth, which, if I'm doing my job right, should be on screen right about now, Earth is very, very populated. Like, everything we see from Earth is megacity. Huge skyscrapers towering into the sky. Which leads me to believe their main problem isn't some kind of climate change, which they can clearly fix with the terraforming they used on the moon of all places, because that is not inhabitable in the slightest. I believe I saw NASA put out that Mars was easier to habitate than the moon, because the moon's got no gravity, no atmosphere, no nothing. At least Mars has some gravity. You know, you can put something down and leave it there. That's not the point. Point is population control. It seems like the obvious solution to everything that's gone wrong on Earth that we've seen, and there could be more, there's I think 4 more episodes of this, would be to expand into space. Not to have some supercomputer spend 75 years trying to come up with a way to fix things. It's to actually implement the technology they have and to use it to colonize the stars. It is very literally the stuff of sci-fi. It is the basic building blocks. It's Explorer. It's Enterprise of all things, you know. It's build the ship and go out there and explore. And it just seems like such an obvious solution. It just destroys the whole first episode for me, because none of it makes any sense. And even worse, we don't even get to see the moon culture really for what they are. Because everything we see is seen through the eyes, or more or less, of the main character, who is the supply ship pilot, who takes the, I'm going to say, leader of the fancy tech company that made this moon computer. And it turns out she's a war veteran and, small spoilers here, a smuggler. But she comes with a very Earth-centric view. She very much represents the audience in that she is pretty much as a modern day human main character would be. But what that means is we never really get to see the moon culture from the perspective of the moon culture. And this is something they did very, very well in The Expanse. When we saw the Belters, we saw the Belters through the eyes of other Belters. We saw Belters interacting with Belters. When we saw Mars, we saw it through the eyes of Martians. And we got to see the interplay between the planets, but we got to see them by themselves as well. And this show, as it starts and ends with a Earther, as they call them actually in this show as well, we never really get to see how the society is meant to function, other than, I'm going to say, through the eyes of almost a colonizer, even though she's not. But of course, not everything is perfect on the moon. It is essentially a weird little cult, and I'll just play a couple clips just now.
We, all of us, have been raised to believe in this mission with all of our hearts and minds.
I'm in your cult now, Paul. You can put flowers in my hair. We can sing songs.
Then, forget everything I said.
This place is not a cult.
But it's not just the weird talking and dances and chanting and screaming in the forest you've got to worry about. It's the fact that they're all cucks. Just kidding. Kinda. Not really. Well, it turns out, on the moon, they're supposed to be in a perfect little utopian society. So they eat jelly. And when I say jelly, I don't mean like big wobbly plate of. I mean like teeny tiny Toblerone of jelly that looks like it's meant to be some kind of vitamin stuff. Think kind of 90s sci-fi where everyone only ate pills. And the family units are totally destroyed. So rather than raising your own kids and forming a family unit, you kind of partner up and then you raise other people's kids. So you only see your own children on the day they're born and the day you die. Which is a awful idea, and it would make no sense because, let's be fair, you can kind of tell when a kid's yours or not. You know, you've got that little bit of inkling. And if there's only a few hundred people, it wouldn't be too hard to work out, you know, that one was mine. And if that wasn't bad enough, you've got what they call weavers. People who weave their way into your family, which is to say, cuck you. So, we'll call him the second lead, is a lunar detective. And this lunar detective is a cuck. And I'm saying that a lot in this video. But it's kind of very central to his character. The fact that he is very much portrayed as the lunar we look to for what all the other lunars are like. And he is miserable. Maybe not always, and maybe not always on the surface. But especially in episode 2, they make it very clear he's unhappy with his family life. And not only that, but we also find out that the leader of their Moon Council, we'll call it, is a power-hungry baddie. Now, we don't know exactly why, we don't know exactly what she's going to do quite yet, but she's going to hold on to power with everything she's got. Now, I've talked a bit about episode 1 and a bit about episode 2, and I haven't really distinguished them yet. So almost all of what I've told you has come from episode 1, which is 1 hour and 20 minutes long, if you can believe that. And the first hour is painstakingly dull. I mean, it's all set up, it's all premise, and I wouldn't call it that good, to be fair. In fact, there's not a chance I would have watched through the whole thing if it wasn't for the fact I was going to make a review of this. However, the last 20 minutes is its saving grace. The last 20 minutes has a nice big twist, not to ruin too much, and it really brings you back into the show and gets you involved. And that same energy is carried through the entirety of episode 2, which is only a 40-minute episode. So if you can get through that first hour, you'll have an hour of entertainment. So other things I should probably mention is there seems to be some kind of human terror group. Or I say human, there's some kind of Earther terror group called, believe it or all things, Terror. And they're against the moon people coming back and bringing with them their essential solutions to Earth. Because the idea is them being the Lunars being the perfect people with the perfect society. They're going to tell us how to fix all our problems. And it seems they're not too keen on that. Although we don't really find out why, at least thus far. A lot of questions remain unanswered. One of the things I mentioned earlier is the weird table screens, and we also see this in Windows, and we also see the kind of projection stuff which I mentioned earlier. Some of it will be on screen now, and I'm not saying the whole place is made out of nanites. I'm just saying, how else would you do that if it wasn't nanites? Just to, keep that in mind. I'm not saying they're all robots, but they're all robots. Not only that, they've also got weird glowing chests, and it is just a little bit weird. And I get the feeling none of this is going to be explained. I mean, absolutely none of it. They're just going to breeze straight past. There's going to be another Interstellar moment. Oh no, the Earth is dying. We need energy. But we're not going to tell you why, how it happened, how we're going to fix it, or anything like that. I mean, at least in this show, they kind of tell you how they want to fix it, but even then, it makes no sense at all. But this is more of a story-driven thriller than a, I suppose, post-apocalyptic action movie. This isn't Sunshine dropping a nuke into the sun and getting it all started again. This again does seem to be very character driven rather than story driven. And it does seem to be at the expense of the story, which is sad, but what can you do? You only get the shows they give you. So I've talked about this for, looking at my counter, 16 minutes. And with any luck, I cut that down quite a bit so you wouldn't have to sit here listening to me ramble for 16 minutes. But let's get to the important part. Should you watch Moonhaven? No. Well, I say no. As it is, I probably wouldn't recommend it. The second episode, I believe, is coming on the 14th. And I believe the next episodes are released week by week. So, if this is something you feel like you may want to watch, I would just leave it 2-3 weeks and, well, wait for my full review to come out, which you will obviously subscribe and see when it happens. But this is definitely the kind of show I would lose interest in over a week. Unless something absolutely huge happens in each episode, I'll just forget about it and I'll move on. And as in part a commentary about our society, I mean, we just can't wait weeks anymore to see what's going to happen next. And this is very much one continuous story rather than several contained stories. So it's going to suffer from that, I think I'll say. So, what else is there to say? Well, at the moment, on Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 67% average tomato meter and an 80% average audience score, which is, I'm going to say, fairly good. It's not spectacular or anything, but it's not bad. Mind you, on IMDb, which is by far my favourite of the movie review sites, it only has a 3.8 rating out of 10 with 157 reviews. So, needless to say, lots of people aren't too keen on it. And I would imagine a vast number of people who'd made those reviews only watched the first episode. Because, well, 72 of them were 1 stars. And while the second episode, while far from perfect, I mean far from perfect, it is not a 1-star episode. Even if I was to be as mean as I could be, it'd be a 3 maybe at the lowest, because the acting's good, the scenery is good, the story, well, does have quite a few holes in it, let's just say. It's coherent, it doesn't deserve a 1. But another reason to wait and see how the next episodes are, really. I mean, this was a kind of a different format. Usually I script my videos, so I've got no idea where I'm going with this. But I think I'll just bring it to an end here. So, should you watch Moonhaven? Sure. Although I would wait for the full thing to come out, and maybe for another review, maybe watch a different person's review, maybe wait for my full review. But as it is, I probably wouldn't want to watch it week by week. And I mean, I would make a video about it, but even I'm not sure I'm going to actually bother to come back to this week after week after week. For what I see overall is a fairly weak story. And there's a large amount of weird in this. In fact, I've got like 2 large pages of notes I've made as I've gone through with timestamps for clips and things. And the most frequent word on this is weird. Weird story time logic, weird poetry talk, weird glowing chests, weird... I've just weird, you know? There's lots of weirds. You know, do you want to watch a guy walk out into the woods, get naked and rub his toes in the moss? Not really, it's kind of weird. But, you know, it happens. So, you can take the show for what it is, or not. And I lean towards the not. That said, this is a family-friendly show, although some bloke does get naked in the woods, and another bloke talks about it, and they talk about being a cuck. It is, in general, I'll call it family-friendly, not kid-friendly, you know. If you're 12 or something, but I don't know, watch this, some guy gets popped in the head, and lots of it will probably get a bit above them. But until next time, this has been Alexander, and should you watch Moonhaven? And I'm back. So I forgot a bit, which is just typical, isn't it? So I haven't actually talked about the cast. So the cast are, well, not actors I recognise. In fact, I don't think I recognise anyone in this whole thing. The second lead looks a little bit like Johnny from Killjoys, but isn't, so there's that. And of the people they're playing, I feel it's worth mentioning, I only really like 2 of them, kinda. The security guard, the bodyguard we meet at the start, is a fairly likeable character. He's kind of like, I call him a little bit gypsy-ish. You know, he's got a bit of kind of fortune teller, brooding kind of look about him. And obviously the second lead, the cop, is kind of the likeable character. I mean, only one really gets any character development other than the main character. And even then, it's 6.5 a dozen. But at least the acting's good. Or not bad. In fact, I made a note about it. It's kind of hard to tell, because weird acting characters and bad acting can get a little close together. You can write something like Data from Star Trek, and his being robotic is not just coherent in the story, but it is fantastic acting on the part of, I can't think of the guy's name, but whoever played him. On the other hand, Spock in Star Trek New Worlds, not Leonard Nimoy, the new guy, or the new Spock, is kind of poor. And I can't tell if it's poor because they've written Spock in a way that doesn't make sense for his character, or if the actor just can't portray the character as it's been written. But at least all the acting here, it seems good and believable. And do you believe that people are crazy and act weird because they're crazy and act weird, rather than the actor is crazy and acts weird? But with that said, this has been Alexander, and should you watch Moonhaven?